close, you're very close.
Go for it.
12:59.
We won't get nailed for transparency, will we, if we start early?
Yes.
Myron, they have no lack of things to nail us for.
One
2
thing
minutes.
or the other, one thing or the
It's the beauty of watches and clocks these days, they're synchronized with the great big satellite in the
Yeah.
sky. So we're on the same page.
Well-
12:15. No, I'm right on.
I think so.
Okay, I would like to reconvene the Cook County Committee of the Whole meeting. And is this like a meeting that gets run the same way?
It's a continuation.
It's a continuation of the meeting, so we'll follow the guidelines. So our first item to discuss the proposed Lutzen Township annexation and discussion of the annexation process.
Ready coming up?
And in all honesty,
Yeah.
let's skip to number 3.
Let's skip to number 3, okay.
Well, I mean, if you guys wanna do something else, that's fine.
Oh, no, but you're here.
I want Brady
let's-
here for the
yeah.
first 2
Yeah.
items, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
go see if he can get here,
Yeah.
and maybe you can start talking about the
Yeah,
RFP process.
so we're going to skip to RFP for the law enforcement facility study.
I will pass these around.
Everybody should have a copy of what you submitted.
Yeah, I
Did you get some this morning?
I've got a couple extra ones that I did up this morning. So the current jail was built in 1997, and when it was built, it was built as a Class 1 facility, which means we can only hold people for a maximum of 72 hours unless it's Huber or work release or STS. So what happens is we get stuck, if you guys want this, if we get stuck transporting and housing our prisoners, typically in Lake County and Aiken County, we've used Crow Wing County, sometimes Wright County. So, that being said, obviously we spend a lot of time on the road. We have a half-time transport person that cannot do all of the transports just because his hours are limited. So we end up using deputies, which ends up taking a patrol deputy out of the county during their shift. And so, the discussion has been going around for a while about looking at possible jail expansion, or just recently talking about a justice center, which would incorporate not only the jail and sheriff's office, but the county attorney's office, and the courts, and court administration. So, Carleton County didn't, they just released an RFP last August. And I talked to the sheriff down there and got a copy of their RFP and basically worked it up to Cook County standards, Cook County specifics. And we're going to be looking at releasing it, obviously with permission from the board, and getting responses back. But these 2 sheets that I gave you earlier, the one that says jail expansion on it, I just want to touch on a few of these things here. Obviously, the first bullet point is eliminating the majority of transport costs. Right now, if you look at the sheet with the Excel, on the bottom it says 2012 expenditures, 2013 and such. Those are the totals of what we spent for housing, transporting our prisoners. That does not count Judy's time, that does not count regular patrol deputies' time, and wages and mileage.
Does that include all of their expenses out of area, like food,
That-
medical?
Well, food's included with the $50 a day or $55 a day, whatever we pay the jail to house our prisoners, our inmates. So food, medical, we pay all medical bills no matter what. So if we have an inmate in Lake County and they have to go see a doctor for some reason, we responsible for paying that.
And
Any-
that's not included in this number.
That should be included, that should be included in those numbers. Second one, reduce the risk of accidents. Greatly decreased or eliminated out-of-county housing costs, which would tie into these numbers here. Housing, transport costs. The number 5 on here, reduce dispatcher jailer stress is a big one, because right now, as Commissioner Dukirk knows, when we have one dispatcher on, that dispatcher has to get up every half an hour and check on the inmates. Well, if there's any type of problem or any calls come in, it creates a lot of stress on those dispatchers.
Deputies assisted me, I don't know if they still do that, but
They will when they're around, yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
just so these guys have a perspective that you've got a deputy in the office doing the jailer duties because things happen.
and when we have 5 or more inmates at a time, we're required under Department of Corrections guidelines to staff 2 people. So we would have a dispatcher and a jailer. So going on from there is, with a jail expansion, we would obviously have to hire more staff. I've talked to Judy about this. Right now, we employ 6 full-time dispatchers. To run a full-time jail, we would have to hire 2 additional staff. So we have 4 dispatchers and 4 jailers. So getting back to these numbers then, on the bottom, by eliminating these transport and housing costs, that would pay for the 2 additional staff that we would need. And the one that I have underlined here is significant income generated. Now, what we've kind of thought about is a 25-bed jail, because with a 25-bed jail, we could run it with 8 dispatcher jailers, of which, like I said, we have 6 now. So based on the 25-bed jail and at $50 under daily cost, if it's full, 365 days of the year, you can see what the revenue would be. If we only have 20 inmates, then that 242 is 2/3 of the year that we would have those 20 inmates. The number correlates, and that 15 inmates for 365 days. And then at $55 a day and then $60 a day, I just kind of spread it out there. $50 a day right now is about the minimum going price for housing inmates across Minnesota. It does go up to $60, of which, right now there is a significant shortage of jail space in northern Minnesota, especially. St. Louis County currently houses 80 of their inmates in Wisconsin because they don't even have room to house their people.
So when you say 80, up to 60, 80 annually,
Yes,
or not 80 like right now? but
80 right now.
80 right now?
80 people right now are housed in Wisconsin
Okay.
because their jail's full, because St. Louis County jail's full.
Wow. And how many did you say were in the St. Louis County Jail itself?
I have no idea.
Okay. I'm just curious of the proportion. 80 people is a lot of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, that being said, in the RFP itself, I just want to bring attention to, right after the board request, the first page, page 1 of 17. On the bottom, it has timelines. Those are not correct. Because I didn't change them because I was waiting to see what we were going to do with the RFP when, talk obviously with the board, talk with Jeff and see what would be appropriate for putting dates on here. So.
So generally, I think Pat's laid out some specific numbers, and I think really what we need a consultant to do is to confirm numbers and give us kind of a cost benefit. Part of what we're gonna be talking about later this meeting is with Bruce Kimmel and look at capital expenses across the organization and what our capacity and what our needs might be. And he's planning on providing, he's given us that proposal to do an assessment for us so that we have that tool as we're budgeting. And we're not here to make a decision on this right now, we're just here to have a conversation about, is this something that we should take a look at? And from the day that I walked in here and we started talking about this, I said, this one makes sense because we can likely fund most of the improvement in a law enforcement center through operational savings at the law enforcement center. And a study would bear that out for us and show us how that could happen. So really, it's just a matter of, is this the right time to take a look at this? And I think the answer is right. It's very similar to the conversation we had with Josh this morning, and you could place a budget on what we're gonna spend for an RFP, and then your consultants will kind of say, well, if you got a budget of $50,000, well, we'll do it for about 57, you know. They'll match the number, they'll use all the dollars that you tell them are available. In this case, we would possibly just be asking to take this RFP and send it out. We could talk about what other people have done, but we know our market is different, and people's willingness to work up here is affected by their perception of the costs of working up here, so. I think we just have to take this one in the context of our later conversation when we get Bruce Kimmel on the line and say, what do we have to do to have a good understanding of our capital needs going forward? And the law enforcement piece is a significant piece of that. The idea to throw the idea of as a justice center makes sense. Does courts and attorney's office just came up in a casual conversation at one of our courthouse security meetings where we were talking about our need for security, and the questions and the issues we have with this building are because we have mixed security needs functions happening in the same building. You know, you don't need the same level of security to deal with the assessor's office and the auditor's office as you do with the attorney's office in courtroom facilities. And if we did consider and do something that freed up some space in the courthouse, then we would not likely have to look at any point in time an expansion of the current facilities. So it's a big, comprehensive, a lot of assumptions being made, but really what we want to do is bring somebody on board to help us test a lot of those assumptions and give us some good industry standards and give us some good some comparisons and things to think about. We've put together a list of things that are challenges for us. We've put together a list of things that we think are opportunities, and but we need some help to make sure that we put that into context and that we evaluate it in the whole larger long-term budgeted impact for the county. Big changes like this have an impact on the county budget for 25 years. You know, so when you do it, you kind of want to do it right, because you can't change your mind 5 years down the road. You haven't paid for it yet, so you can't change it.
Commissioner Sterling?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Are you looking at upgrading the present site or to have a new site?
We would have, we would have to have a new site. The present site was not built to expand anywhere other than out. And once you start doing that, you're losing parking space. And I mean, if we have a justice center, which will incorporate courts, county attorney, we will need quite a large area to accommodate everybody like that. The foundation was not built to go up.
And you'll impinge on the apple trees.
Yeah.
So are you looking at another site?
Well,
Just in the beginning?
I think that would be part of what the consultants would help us out with, is locating another site. And right now, if there's some talk with the Border Patrol, they are interested in buying our facility over there.
So I would suggest that when you evaluate a major project like this, you always have several options. And we've had this conversation in relation to the highway facilities, and we had this conversation last week with the Public Safety and Transportation Committee about the same thing. So remember, we got a bunch of big pieces that we're evaluating at the same point in time. But options when you're talking about a major project is always do nothing. Fix what you got and muddle through. Improve what you have so that you have some capacities that we don't currently have, or completely redesign something. And any consultant that's gonna work on a project is gonna give you options along those lines, and they're gonna give you the pros and cons of any one of those scenarios, and probably make a suggestion based on some cost-benefit analysis of what would be a recommended strategy. I mean, there's, this could get really big, or this could be a conversation that doesn't go anywhere, and that largely depends on you and the public support for any of these projects.
I guess I'd like to comment, and been in some of the conversations preceding this, and I've always sort of advocated, and my background is, you know, you look at the big picture, you look long-term, and I think, you know, Mr. Cadwell's addressed that. And then we have to look at, you know, what is the most logical way to proceed, you know, the financial picture. But I think it's very important to look at some of these contingency things, like being able to sell a facility. I mean, that's opportunity that is time-related to some extent, I suppose. And then, does that fuel enough, you know, concern that we look at this in a larger context of the Justice Center? You know, and so, and I'm sure we're gonna get that data, you know, if this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And then, of course, that all folds into what happens with the maintenance facilities, but you know, we can't do it all at once, but I think we should think about it all at once and try to figure out in the context of what seems to be the most logical way to proceed.
Senator, did you want to weigh in on
So
that?
Pat, we will have to still transport some of our inmates. We're not gonna be able to house everyone here. If we have an inmate with a medical issue or a mental wellness issue, are we looking at building a facility where we can handle all of that?
Well, I mean, as far as medical issues go, I mean, if it's something that North Shore Health cannot handle, obviously we would transport them. And the mental health issues, that would depend on what it is.
Okay.
You know, if we were going to do this and really take accountability for people who we bring in, especially in a chemical dependency issue, we would have a detox and contract out with public health for counselor services. So that there's a little bit more accountability for.
I know you don't like bringing them to other counties and dropping them off and not knowing how they're doing until they reappear in a squad car.
I just had a question about the yearly revenue on the sheet, that would come from, this yearly revenue is based on other counties paying to
Yes.
house their inmates in
Here.
our jail?
Yes.
And what potential is that? Well, because Lake County doesn't have?
Lake County's full too. I mean,
Because they're full, so it's
Yes.
based on their.
Jan, we've been at quarterly meetings where the whole state is full.
Okay.
And they're having to transport, so.
Got it, so it's really based on all the jails are full.
All the jails are full, and Dakota County is creating a statewide transport system. Basically, it's basically like, you know, you're at the airport and you look up at the board and see who's going where and what time. And
Wow.
they kind of, you know,
Bus.
if Rice County's going to Mille Lacs County, they can pick up some other people and bring them up that far, somebody else pick them up there, and it's going to be quite a network, actually.
So if we build this facility, you can call them and tell them you got a van for them.
And we could
But I
be the
mean,
wellness jail.
as far as, you know, if there's any question about, you know, would counties bring their inmates up this far,
Yeah.
then I seriously think that would not be a problem at all.
So are you looking at building a 25-person facility?
Yes.
So we wouldn't be able to bring this revenue in because we have our own people that or do we get to charge them
Well-
$50 a day too?
Charge who, $50?
Our own inmates?
Well, you know, when there are Huber or STS, we do, yes, they
We
do
do
have,
collect money
they
on
do
that.
pay to be on those programs.
Okay.
sizing the facility would be one of the consultant's recommendations. That would be based on
All the
current,
data.
current numbers,
Mhm.
projections, all of those things. Really what we need to do is we need to know if this is the time to take a look at it, and I think the answer is yes.
Mhm.
We need to find somebody who's capable of doing this, who understands the scope of this problem in the state. Basically, when we get to the point of discussing with Bruce about putting a capital improvement plan together for us, we've got a fairly developed project options from the highway department that we reviewed. We don't have that level of detail for a law enforcement center. And we don't know, is it just improving the jail from 72 to 365? Or is it the consideration of a justice center? Or is it all these things? But we don't have that level of detail to be able to put it up in the same kind of consideration as the level of detail that we have related to our highway facilities needs and some of our other needs. So for Bruce, he's gonna have to make some basic general assumptions on square footage and typical numbers and age of plant and pretty standard assumptions you can make based on facility needs and facility costs and infrastructure. But for us to actually think about program and what makes the most sense, we gotta develop law enforcement plans to the 90% developed options that we've got already with the highway department. And the first step of that process is reviewing an RFP and saying, does this look like a good process? And the next question at an upcoming meeting would be the same question that we asked with Health and Human Services. Is this the time to send out an RFP to study this in our community? And that's what the next step would be, if everybody agrees, is we would bring it to a future meeting next week or first meeting in June and come back with an adjusted timeline. So if we looked at it, we'd take that timeline and bust it out to current year's information. I have really no idea of what numbers would come in at, but
Curious,
the
really
one casual offhanded estimate, when I had a conversation with Nancy from CRBPS that did the study for us up at the YMCA.
Yeah.
And preliminarily, she had said, okay, well, I'll do this for 15,000. And I said, okay, what is that? She said, that's an energy audit. That's a building audit. And I said, no, I need a feasibility study to talk about what this facility should look like. She said, okay, we have the resources to do that too, but it's a different question. And her question came around 46,000, I think, to do a study. Was one person's estimate of what it would take to put something like that together.
We paid for ours for the first phase, first 5 options. We paid, I think, 34,000 for that. And then to do the 6th option up at the airport site was, I think, 5,000 is what we paid.
So mid-40s doesn't seem unreasonable to me, but of course, we go through a competitive process and we encourage some people that we know who have participated at Carleton. We've worked with Chisago, who are working with Dakota and some of the current, the people who are currently involved in this game. Maybe they've got, we find a scale of efficiency. You already talked about the fact that you're planning on holding off on some staffing replacements to leave some room in the budget to be able to accommodate something like this, so.
Yes.
We have an idea of where we can find funding to make this happen.
Will they be able to take into account, or I assume, or we'll discuss with them about just the natural growing needs of us for facility space anyways? So, if you move the courts and that, then it opens up space for some of us that can't help that we're growing out of our space. So, there's other factors that get involved. If eventually there's going to need to be more space, and you can create that in a place where we already need space rather than creating some separate building, you know what I mean? Like, will they be able to factor that into their, it's like a hidden cost that's, kind of there but not.
I see a lot of big potential moving pieces, and yes, I think we have to ask that question, but I think we can make the assumption too that if we create space in this building, that amount of space, then we know we won't ever have to change the exterior
That's
of this
my thought,
building.
yeah.
Which means a roof and windows and exterior and
Which is
interior
expensive.
refinishing periodically. We can put numbers on that and know that's not big numbers, it's manageable numbers, and we're already making a commitment to do the majority of the exterior work next year.
Yes, thank you. So in this RFP, could we specify, and I don't know, I guess I'm just asking this a question, that we could look at two options. We could look at it, it's pretty much determined that it would be logical to go to a new site just because of, you know, what the sheriff mentioned and as well as the possibility of sale. Have some kind of cost analysis of a jail site, and then what would it take to make the Justice Center, you know, as part of that? And then part of the question would be, especially related to bonding, is how much would we save by doing it at once versus, you know, doing it later? So we have two different issues that we could look at.
Yeah, exactly, and
That would be part of this.
The 25, 30-year needs of this organization for facilities, we've got to give, if we're gonna have Bruce do a capital plan for us, Ellers is gonna do a capital plan for us, we have to give them enough information to give us a valid 30-year plan. And when you're looking at facilities, you've got to be looking at a 20 to 30-year plan, or you're just not thinking far enough out.
Yep.
Well, it looks like we have in here to include 3 alternatives for renovation, expansion, and new construction, so
Oh, okay, where is that?
that's on page 9,
Thank you. I was looking at
number
that.
1.
The other piece about this whole conversation I really like is changing the model from a jail to a justice center. And that shifts a lot of things, and the potential for that whole idea changing what jails look like in the future. So it opens up the potential of what does a jail look like, or what does a justice center look like in 30 years versus what does a jail look like? And I just, that has enormous potential and could solve a lot of other problems as well.
I saw a situation where, when I was in the city of Monoman County reorganized their courthouse because their human services department was growing just like ours.
Yeah.
And so they moved the county attorney's office to some professional space downtown 2 blocks away. And the court administration was still in the courtroom, and the sheriff's office was still in the courtroom. They don't have a jail. They had some temporary holding facilities within their sheriff's department. And then they had an issue where the county attorney was saying, we don't feel safe in this environment because we're not here with the sheriff's office. So they co-located the wrong things, and they split apart the things that didn't make sense. When the attorney's office was next to court administration, and that level had a level of security to get up to that level of the courtroom, and the sheriff was in the building, they never had a problem. And then they like I said, they had the same problem with Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services needed another floor in the courtroom, and it had the unintended consequence. So at this point, they're having a conversation about creating a jail, a dispatch center, and a justice center, so that they can scale back and not have to rent space downtown for their offices, but provide space for that within the buildings that they own. So the idea didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of practical difficulties that I've seen and I've heard people have experienced.
The juxtaposition of those things, yes.
Yeah, I would just like to go back to that, so I think we clarify it. Commissioner Dukirk referenced item number 1 on page 9, but my assumption was that is for the Cook County Jail, and it's not about a justice center, what I was alluding to
Well,
before.
it's new construction too.
Well, is that part of my question is that part of,
That's
part of the
that's part of the
justice
scoping.
center?
That's part of the scoping you do with the consultant.
Okay, so this would indicate that it's just a jail, or would it indicate that there would be an option to consider this as part of a justice center, or are we just gonna wait to see what they recommend?
Well, I would think that we would tell them the scope is, we would
Okay.
think that we would want to include both options.
Okay.
And we want to include both options because we're looking at space throughout the county facilities.
Okay.
And that they would give us some sort of professional opinion about which one has a cost-benefit rationale behind it.
Well, I guess I would just like to
Myron, that'd be
support.
number 10 on that same page. The final report should develop a broad understanding of facility parking operational needs related to a criminal justice function.
Okay, that would fit it, okay, thank you.
It is completely incumbent on us sending out the RFP and the people working with it on a day-by-day basis to give them a significant understanding of the way that our operations are similar or different from the stuff. We bring in somebody who's already experienced with working with counties and jails and justice centers, but we would need to give them enough information about the way we work so that they could do an RFP that would be valid. And again, this is all real preliminary work. If we said go tomorrow and we had number of millions of dollars allocated to do something like this, we'd be 5 years out. You know, we need to, if we want to have a comprehensive look at facilities, then we need to take a comprehensive look at all of our facilities. Dave's led the way in getting plans to the point of 90% to say, here's what our needs are. And now we need to do the rest of that for the rest of our facilities. And that's the only way to have a long-range financial plan that can possibly account for all the things we're looking at. It's kind of scary. I look around the room and I don't see too many people who are going to be worried about what happens at the end of a 25-year bond.
I plan to.
Oh, good point.
That was right over my head.
In your current position?
I will be here because I have been waiting 4.5 years for this discussion to start.
I know.
But I mean, that's kind of that's the significance of conversations about
Mhm.
public infrastructure and public buildings is you're
Mhm.
making decisions for the next generation. You know, we're making decisions that are
Yeah.
gonna have an impact today, tomorrow, and a generation into the future, so.
I can tell you for several
I'd
years,
still
I've
be
been driving
working.
to meetings in St. Paul, looking at that beautiful facility that's off of 35, right on the side of that.
Pine County.
Oh, it's a beautiful building.
Or you could go down to Appleton, Minnesota, and drive past that empty, vacant ghost town of was it a 400-bed facility sitting down there empty? I mean, go down to the city of Ramsey, look at the Ramsey Business Park and this parking structure that they created, and the thing's just been sitting vacant since they did it, because they missed the light rail.
Oh, yeah,
So, I
yeah.
mean, there are cases where you see things that were really well done with public
Uh-huh.
infrastructure, and you can see things that were really bad misses too.
Yes.
Which is why having a professional help lead the way and give you real
Yeah.
solid advice is
That's
important.
vision.
You know, excuse me, but, I was listening to a presentation on the change that could happen in the court system, where the drug-related things would be incarceration, whereas now in the Obama administration, they were more dealt with without incarceration, make it simple. And so if that whole thing changes, our jails are really gonna be flooded, and they maybe will fill up Appleton again.
Mhm.
But I mean, so, you know, that whole the whole justice system is big. Now, how that affects us, I don't know, but it could, yeah. I also would like to just add and emphasize that I think it's really good for public health and for the quality of living here that we try to deal with our issues as much as we can. Because once we ship them off, the research is clear that if someone's in detox here versus there, there's usually a greater likelihood that there's going to be some support for them. And same with incarceration short term. And I don't know if you've noticed that, but I know that we're talking about that at the ARC as well. And so the ARC whole emphasis is actually, you know, working with probation officers as much as we can within the system, because it just is more effective. Absolutely more effective. And we do have to care for our incarcerated people. I mean, they're here too, and they're human beings. And we try to help them.
And I'd want to be here too. I mean, of all the choices. To be incarcerated, I'd pick here.
And I think $50 a day is less than a nursing home, so They do have that
Okay.
option.
I have some options.
There, we can build it next to assisted living.
Can we do childcare, assisted living?
Incarceration. Yeah.
There's no issues with that, right?
Is there any justice to that? Okay.
Inmate childcare.
Get it all done in one.
Yeah, well,
Take it.
there's some things you can't do all at once. Okay,
So you'd like us to bring a proposal for an RFP to a future meeting?
yeah. Is that,
We'll clean up the dates.
Yep,
that's what I'm hearing.
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning, unless there's some other, is there any other reason to move something else, change the order here? We'll go into the beginning?
The only point I would make is that we
Yeah.
are dialing in to Bruce
Oh, at
Kimmel
2.
at 2:00.
Right, so we
So
should.
wherever we are at about 2:00, I'm gonna break in and do
Yeah.
that.
This
Okay.
is short.
Yeah, I bet the top two are kind of short.
Ah, thanks.
So let's do the top, proposed Lutzen Township annexation, discussion of the annexation process. Okay,
Okay. Well, Molly's
So-
gonna weigh in on this too, but,
So the important conversation here is that we're not talking about the annexation request. We've set a public hearing. We simply want to, if there are any questions that people have about the authority for annexation, and review that so that you have more of a context of the process. We're not discussing the request because we set the public hearing for that in June. I'm sorry, Brady.
no, that's fine. So what you have in the packet is the basic statute set out for changing boundaries and altering boundaries of towns, partitioning them, lots of different options. In this case, it was a petition just to add a piece. To the town of Lutzen, you can see within that statute that it has to abut. So therefore, on the map, you saw where it actually does abut to Lutzen Township. Can't go out and pick a spot. Just any questions, just ask the questions, but I think the main question when you read this is the requirements for the number of legal voters. That's where Molly and I sat down and talked about that, and talked to the state of Minnesota also. And basically, they kind of defer to counties when it's town organized territory. They really step in when it's a city, but when it's lower level than that, when it's town, they kind of leave it up to us to interpret this. And because our unorganized territories are pretty, they're not well populated, so we can't meet these standards of 20. And actually, in that area, there were 39 private owners in that area that they outlined on the map that you saw. And within those, there were 5 couples that are registered voters that live in that area. And those are the 10 people, 5 that signed the petitions. So all the people that live in there that are registered voters that live in that district were all in favor of this. There were 2 other registered voters in Cook County that just have land there. They live elsewhere. They did not, as I understand it, they were asked and were either in favor or neutral. They were fine with it. And then the rest are just bare land or seasonal properties. So, I guess in effect, we have all of the people that are registered to vote there in favor of this, even though you don't meet the 20. And they're basically leaving it up to us to make that interpretation.
So we can do whatever we want.
Well, within the statute.
Yes, but I mean, we can do less than, we could accept it with less than the 20.
Yeah,
legal
I'll let
voters.
Molly should.
Yeah,
stand
yeah,
also.
I'm curious.
Brady, can you pass, so make sure that at least Jan has one of those, and Jeff wants one, there might be enough for him too, but, in this document, all I did is, so Brady has provided you with the actual statutes, and I pulled the language in the first third of this page from, the 2 statutes that have been provided. I just wanted to pull the language out of that dense material so you could see what's required. The only hang up here is that number 20. That took a while for, to really sort out how meaningful is that number. Because in this case, we have 100%, not just 20 of the legal voters residing within the territory to be affected, but 100%. And given the, just the unique nature of land ownership in this county, that a lot of people who own the land here are not residents, are not legal voters who reside where they own the land. I think that the commissioners could make a decision to accept this petition and alter the boundaries even without the 20. That is of course, that's the base requirement that's required by the statute. If you wanted to require more, it's your discretion. What the statute says is that commissioners, the county may alter boundaries. I think if you're gonna deny the petition, you should make sure that you have, some reasons to put on the record if you're gonna deny it, or ask for more, approvals from landowners, but it is your discretion. So what I mean by 100% is more than 20 is, like, consider in a different portion of land in an unorganized territory that you were going to abut to a town that was perhaps bigger, had more parcels, had more residents who were registered to vote there. You might have 100 in that pool, and only 20 could get you a petition that would pass. So in that case, you'd only have 20%, and that would, technically meet the requirements of the statute, but it still wouldn't be 100% of, the pool that's required to be counted here. So that's kind of the rationale that I'm using to tell you, yeah, I think you could take this, you could make a change to the boundary based on this petition if you would like to. What else? I do think that at the public hearing, if you as a body decide to accept the petition and alter the boundaries, that you should put something on the record about that. We recognize that we don't have the 20, we have 10, but we have 100%. Put some kind of rationale on the record. Other than that.
So include that in a resolution, if we accept that, the petition by resolution, we would acknowledge that in an item in the resolution potentially?
You could do it that way. My request would just be that it be part of the record in some way, whether it's part of the recorded conversation, part of a written documentation that you add to the record of the public hearing.
Would this be done before the public hearing? Or after we have the public hearing?
After the public hearing.
After.
Okay. I've been thinking about that time frame too. We did set it at 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how many people, I know it's summer and folks would be around to come at 10 o'clock in the morning. I just would like to reconsider that. Let's have some conversation about having later in the afternoon that maybe more people could come. I don't know.
So do we have to make
Unfortunately,
notice
the notice has
30
already
days?
been published.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's.
Okay.
Not with a new date.
It's being published this weekend and it's out,
Is out already?
posted in the,
Okay.
And we need 30 days for this, right? So if we were to change the
Yeah.
date, then it'd be next Tuesday's meeting, and then it'd be 30 days out from that.
Tuesday's the 22nd?
Yep, so it wouldn't be until the end of
So-
June.
I know at least some are really concerned about having them have the ability to take part in the town meetings in August.
We have the annual meeting, yes, about the second week of August. They would like to have this finalized before then.
So this is probably, do you see that's gonna be controversial?
Not controversial, I'm just saying,
People wanna show up,
yeah,
say something?
right. Well,
And what time are you hearing is more convenient?
late afternoon, early evening, when people are out for work. But, because it isn't just the folks who live here, it's everybody in the township, I think, would probably appreciate a chance to have an opinion.
Well, if we were to
Sure.
change the date at the next board meeting, the earliest posting would be June 23rd, which is a Friday. We don't have another county board meeting until August 11th, which means that
July.
Sorry, I skipped a whole month, July. July 11th.
We're taking the month of July off this year.
Summer just flies. I mean, just thinking of those that want to attend the August meeting, I mean, people can submit comment via letter, can't they? I mean, they don't have to be present in the room. They've got 30 days to.
Right, and I am going to town board tonight, and there would be another one in June that I would try to emphasize that folks.
There are typically, generically speaking, two ways of annexation. One is via petition of the property owners, which is the case that we're dealing with now, and the other one is orderly annexation, which is brought forward by the local unit of government, whether that's a city or whether it's a township. And quite honestly, the one that's brought forward by petition generally doesn't have that much opposition if you've got a good solid petition and a good solid base of people who are petitioning to that. But that doesn't change the conversation about when we should generally hold our public hearings. But
Well, the other thing could be, they could come before the township too, in June or July. They've not come before the board. It's been handled with a supervisor, talking to Brady, and so maybe that would be a possibility. We could encourage those participants to come and explain at a town board meeting. Keep the date the same.
Is this for, excuse me, is this for opposition, if some people are opposed?
Oh, it's any kind of opinion,
Okay.
approval, opposition,
Yeah.
anything. Well,
I mean, to me, it makes sense if there's a controversy, but if there doesn't appear to be any controversy, I don't understand why we
That's why I
changed
set it
the-
for 10 a.m. because it seemed when you have every
Yeah,
property
we do.
owner signing that this
Yeah.
wasn't going to be a huge issue.
Yeah, but I think your comments are well taken for future public hearings, that we need to be more mindful of making sure that people can get there. Does that sound?
but I will open it up for the board to discuss the possibility of, being open in July or the June meeting, if they want the full presentation before the town board, for the public to come there.
Not for us.
No, not for us.
the township has
Township.
already submitted their,
Yeah.
They've already approved the
they've already
petition.
Yeah,
approved,
they've
they've already
approved it.
approved the petition and sent it to us for consideration, so
Okay.
they can certainly have conversation,
Yeah.
but it's outside of the
Right.
loop of the current process that's
Right.
involved.
Okay.
My only concern would be that whatever factors you're taking into account when you vote at the public hearing are made part of the record at the public hearing. So, if you go to a town board meeting and hear opinions there, that you reference that
Right.
you were there and you're taking those into opinion, into your opinion, I guess.
Okay.
Just looking for a solid record
Right.
on whatever the decision is.
Okay. First time is a lot to dig through. Now we'll be better the next round.
Yeah. There's gonna be a lot of these
A
now.
lot of this,
Yeah.
yes.
It's gonna be people thinking.
What was the last one, Brady?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of one.
Ginny, is the town talking about taking over those roads as town roads, or just annexing those folks in?
Just annexing.
Okay.
Specifically, no conversation about that.
Because Lutzen's our one township that doesn't have town roads, and they get bypassed with gas tax funds, so. But they also don't have any roads to take care of, so that's
Okay.
kind of why I asked.
Leave it.
So,
Okay. We're good? How about discussion of the consent agenda policy?
after the question came up at the last meeting, I thought it would be a good idea to just throw it in here, and this is the consent agenda policy that was approved in 2014 and identifies the purpose and the kinds of things that make sense to be considered for consent agenda items. And basically, I just asked if people had any questions about it.
Any questions, any comments?
Well, and I think the good thing is that when we have our meeting reported in the paper, they will bring up some of these issues that we have on the consent agenda. It was anyway last week in the paper. Yeah, so I mean, there's a follow-up with what we don't discuss at the meeting, it's a follow-up in the paper.
I don't follow that.
That we cannot control.
Yeah.
That is up to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, everybody here agrees that it works. I mean, I have been at many, before consent agenda meetings, and once they learn about consent agenda, oh my gosh, it goes way, the meetings go way better. Because there's so many things that don't need to be discussed every meeting, and these, you outline them.
It's interesting that it was approved in April of 2014, it only took us 4 months to come to consensus on the consensus of the consent agenda.
Well,
Super Sean.
Madam Chair, the question I have is, are there limits or cutoffs or circuit breakers in regards to miscellaneous department purchases? You know, I've
It's not-
noticed over the time that there, presentations have been made to the board for department purchases. And here it says that consent agenda could be miscellaneous department purchases. So does miscellaneous have some significance? Are there dollar amounts attached to that? I believe that sometimes, well, let's take maybe a big but, we'll go to the extreme, on the end of the continuum. Let's say that we have approved a budgetary discretion for the highway department, you know, in the budget, when it's adopted, to buy something. And could that be just put into the consent agenda, or would, you know, our head of, our engineer have to come and make a presentation if it was, you know, like a $200,000 item versus a $10,000 one?
Well, that's largely reflective of the personality of the board at any given time. I mean, it really is, because,
Yeah. Poor
because
Dale.
we could
No,
say,
it's-
the capital plan included this year, and we discussed at budget, and we said, we're gonna purchase a grader. And Dave could have said, I'm purchasing the grader, and I'm executing this purchase agreement, and it falls within the budgetary plans,
Yeah.
and put it on the consent agenda. And depending on the sitting board, they could say, that makes perfect sense, we've already
Yeah.
made that decision, we've already approved that, I'm okay to let that go in consent. Somebody could say, hear something in the public and say, I'd like to pull that and just have a conversation, and just because of the size of that purchase, I'd like us to make a special motion on it. So that it's really, and we kind of have this conversation, so the item that Rena brought to the board this morning, she put it through as consent because it was just part of routine business, part of general business, and we had a quick conversation and said, but it's a new agreement. It's not natural, it's not a renewing of something we've already done, it's completely
in the budget.
consistent, it
And it
wasn't
wasn't in the
specifically in the
budget.
budget. We probably won't overspend budget as a result of this, but we still said, well, this
It
is,
wasn't.
so it's a really easy conversation to have, and let's have a specific vote on it. But the circuit breaker is always, if we put it on the consent agenda and somebody says, I'd like to pull that out just so that we
Yeah.
can make a specific motion on that, you always have that. And then, as we're planning the agenda, we're gonna kind of react to that, and that kind of goes like this. Now, a specific question, Brady, do we have a spending limit on, you know, what does
As a
Brian
policy?
spend on maintenance in the building without asking for authorization? Does he buy a $500 floor scrubber?
All we've got in the policy is that they have to make a request, it's a capital item if it's over $1,000.
So there's,
Number one, it requires a form, capital form. If it's over 5,000, if, let's say it's under 5,000, it's been budgeted, the policy now says you don't have to ask again, you can purchase it, it'll just show up in the bills. But if it's over 5,000, even if it's been budgeted, it takes a specific request. But that doesn't say anything about consent agenda, it just means it has to show up somewhere.
That's my point.
And you guys have to make an approval, other than it's implied, other than that it just shows up on the bills. It needs a request before the board
Yes.
and to be itemized.
There's a lot of governmental units that if it's a budgeted item and you're within budget, it doesn't come to the board at all.
Yeah.
So,
That's come to the county board at least twice since I've been auditor, and
Yep.
because of the MAT team has asked that
yeah.
a couple of times, and the county board has thought about it and said, no, we
Yeah.
want a limit on it, so, just so you know, it's been discussed.
Commissioner DeKirk, did you still have a question?
I did, I would love for budgeted items because all of our departments, most of our departments break their budget down to the penny of how much the grader's gonna cost, and usually they come in under because they estimate a little higher, and I would love for it to be on the consent agenda. My fear though is if Dave is mid-trail working on a project and someone on the county board decides to pull an item and then it doesn't get approved and he's waiting, he's got a contract ready to go and he has to wait, if it's the last meeting of the month, you're waiting 3 weeks, and do we lose that price? So I think for you, it's also a protection to make sure that nothing gets lost in the crack anywhere. I mean, if we've approved it and we've interrogated this guy for 6 months already to get him to the point where he knows what he can buy in the next year, why are we doing it again for the next 6 months?
Commissioner Bishop?
I think I just comment, I know in education we had some rules, but one of the things that gets confusing, I think with the public, at least here, that I've noticed is that if something comes to the board as, you know, our approval outside of the consent agenda, they get the impression that it's new money. So I would think that a way of pre-approved budgetary items or capital purchases always go to consent agenda unless it is not in the budget, or it is a change in the budget or a change order. Instead of getting a grader, you're buying a truck. But you know, I don't know if we need to even do that. I think consistency is important in how we communicate to the public, so that we're not coming off like we're spending money, you know, that are outside of the budget. So
But
if
the
it's in the
forms that-
budget and it's been approved, it goes to consent, just to acknowledge that it has been. But if it's something that's beyond budgetary issues or a new RFP, then it goes to our agenda, not a consent agenda.
Commissioner DeKirk?
My understanding, coming off on that?
Yeah,
Mhm.
all of the forms that the department heads fill out, it says right on the bottom if it's been budgeted. So when the public assumes that we're buying things out of budget, we're not, because it says right on the form that we're not.
But it's pretty hard to put in the policy, I think, Commissioner Bershon, as long as we have a way to pull it. I like the idea of having a way to pull it, but not
I
necessarily a
have no
way to make
problem
it
with
go
that.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just have noticed over some
Yeah.
times when someone has to come and get an approval for
Yeah.
a grader that we've already budgeted. I've
But I would-
noticed that and why. And
but the department head makes that call, probably.
Okay.
And that, you know, they may make that call because they want to bring it to the public's attention for some reason, or they, you know, there's something else they want to present, or, so I don't want to usurp the department head's ability to put it on the agenda other than the consent agenda. They may have a reason for it, or even, there may be something controversial
Well, I think
about it
there's- yeah.
that just popped up, you know, maybe.
I'm just thinking as a
Yeah.
general rule.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me too, as a general, and I think that is a general.
we, 2 meetings ago, we put accepting the retirement of Gary Radloff on the regular agenda. Could certainly have been on the consent agenda. but we wanted to put it there because we wanted to specifically say it out loud.
You want to
We
say
didn't
that?
want to gloss over it as a number of 6
Yep.
or 8 things on the consent agenda. So there's other times where we make
Sure.
the determination to do something like that too. If I miss something like that, pull it off and say, I'd like to specifically acknowledge this. So it really is a negotiation, and it does kind of ebb and flow, and it really is a kind of a reflection of the personality of the board. So we have guidelines more than rules here. If I were Dave, I wouldn't put the grader on the consent agenda for a regular meeting and not be there anyway,
Right.
in case somebody had questions about it. You know,
Okay.
you wouldn't want to be in the situation of, even if he did put it there, he'd still be there that day in case somebody had a question about it.
Or at least be at the office.
Be available.
Yeah, be available, so. Yeah, so we look at that kind of stuff, and so that, being the highway department, the animal that it is, I always try to block that time out. And then I just use it for office, to make sure that it's my office time, I don't take meetings during that time. So that's not that big a deal for us, but it could be an emergency I get called away for, that I've just gotta go. And so, yeah, that is a possibility.
Okay.
One thing I've wondered about is just sometimes the titles, and I've done it myself, where it's a very vague title, agreement, blah, 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 and there's no description there. Of course, you can find a description, and I don't know how you legislate that, but for the public, it might be at least to have some detail that tells you what it's about in the title. Usually it's there, but not always.
We can take a look at best practices. I've seen people's,
Yeah.
I've seen
Maybe
other
that's-
counties' agendas, and the agenda is 20 pages long, but that's because it has a brief
It's just
synopsis of every consent agenda item. You're not gonna go through it, and you're gonna process the first 4 pages of the agenda with one motion and vote, right? But they put more information. They have the background information back in the packet, but they have like a synopsis of each one of the items as a part of their agenda. So there's just different ways of doing it to get at.
And I'm thinking ahead, if we ever have, where you can search the minutes, like over years of
Yeah.
time,
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
like a word you want, and is it in there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it works really well.
Yeah.
It might be in the minutes, though, but it might, anyway.
I've
Well, I think-
seen counties where the final budget's on the consent agenda, because they've already discussed it, and it's just
Yeah.
Dave, did you have something?
The other thing I was gonna say too is
Oh, yeah, here we
I think if with the agenda and the agenda packets, if we can get those back to where you can click on an item and go jump to it again, so that, and I've gotten a lot of complaints from people, in the public on that. But if we can get to that, then people can just go and they can read the packets. If I was sending a grader to the board, whether it's consent agenda or whether it's regular agenda, my packet's still gonna be the same. Might actually have a little bit more information in consent, depending upon, just to make sure there weren't any questions. That's the way I would handle it. So, if we can do that, and then everybody can just jump to it, take a look at it, and if they wanna talk to somebody about it, then everything's crystal clear, and then we can still keep a clean agenda. That's just my 2 cents.
had that complaint too.
Great. Okay, it's,
2 o'clock.
we can get back to the subject, but it's 2:00, and Bruce Kimmel on the phone.
On the telly.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, are you there?
For the social worker, if you can't keep a job for more than a year, well, then you're on the worst job ever.
space center.
Mhm.
Should we keep talking?
Yeah. Chat quietly amongst yourself.
Yes, we'll keep talking
No
amongst
attention
ourselves.
to the
Yeah, the
person
man behind the
the
curtain over
screen,
there.
so.
Did anybody want to say anything more about the consent agenda?
The only thing that I would like to add, and thank you for the opportunity, is
Hello,
that
Bruce.
it's somewhat consistent,
Mm-hmm.
that's all.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and then if it's not consistent, then we just note it,
Mhm.
and that's all.
Yep. These are guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been meetings where I've looked at the items on and wanted to make a motion at the beginning to move them all to the consent agenda, because we've already talked about them.
Yeah.
There are some cities that, I know cities for sure, that's everything, every single thing except for public hearings starts with consent. And then the councils go through and say, I want to pull this, this, and this to discuss.
What's all the onus on them instead
They
of
have
making?
they have like 25-minute meetings.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting.
They have budgets with.
Not sure I would do that,
Or
but
budgets this
They
big.
have budgets bigger than ours.
yeah,
Wow.
big cities, you know, 25, 30,000
Yeah.
person cities, and everything starts there, and then they whittle it out, and then then they just deal with stuff they want to deal with.
And you have to, because, I mean, you deal with a $300 million or, you know, $500 million budget. You just can't go through all that. That's pretty much where I
Even with our
came
puny
from.
budget, we were spending, we were in minutia all the time,
I agree.
questioning everything.
I've never seen.
Hi, Bruce. I can't see we can get a hold of you here.
Cause I agree. I've used agenda software and I've been, I love being able to search budget items from like 15 years ago. It was wonderful, like, I mean, my last county, their agenda software went back almost 15, 20 years ago. You could pull
Are you
agenda
there
items
now?
from like 16 years ago by searching like the word emergency preparedness, and you could pull agenda items from the.
I'm hearing you on my phone. I'm not hearing you.
These are really great.
Retention and data.
It was not nice.
Management
It was nice for me because we attached you always attached all items to the agenda, so then I could like something like this, okay, I need to do an RFP. Have we ever done a similar RFP? So you go to the agenda, find a similar RFP and work out the bill. So you had this tracking record for everything that the county's done.
What's the cost for that software?
No, Jeff's looking into the one that I've used before.
Good
And who
point.
creates the search strings?
Hang on.
Oh, it's worth looking at.
That's what we were just talking
Now,
about.
can you hear me?
This is business.
But-
It's easy for you to administrate.
With theirs, the programming does it.
There's, since it's hosted.
Now, can you hear
Must
me?
have, Nancy must have.
You could take it.
Or-
You could,
You can hear me there,
We
but.
always had a clerk of the program.
you could attach it to the.
Okay, it's not playing on this end, so we're just gonna grab.
Report, you know, that's a PDF. You never know.
Yep, I'll get the voice thing over here and do it that way. It is,
Mm-hmm.
It's not an IT problem.
387. Oh, so dial you the number on the meeting notice, okay, we'll give you that one then. Okay.
Same thing with all this stuff.
Okay, I don't know why, he could hear us, but we couldn't hear him.
They should all know how to use it.
I can still see him.
So we can look at him, oh, then let's look at him.
Yeah, it's doesn't matter now. But he can't see us.
He can see us, he can
Oh, he
hear
can?
us, we can't hear him.
Well, let's
Do
try
you
it
need to be
out.
plugged into the
I
TV?
agree.
I was plugged,
But
I
it's-
was plugged into the TV, then I unplugged from the TV to see if I was doing that, but I wasn't getting my video signal.
Computer, they think somehow IT should do it. Or own centers. Or spill that's what it
Okay.
Technology. Yeah.
How do we dial this one? Same way as we dial a regular phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, 9-1.
That's why I switched this, it's more user friendly.
It's 9 to get out of the building.
Oh. That means we had a country code, all of our own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID followed by pound. If you're the leader, please press star now. You are now joining the meeting.
So we've got Bruce's proposal in here.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, Bruce. We've got all the commissioners here. We've got Brady, Rena Rogers, Josh Beck, Molly Hicken, Dave Betts, and several members of the community here as well.
Great. Hi, everyone.
Hi, can you see
Hello.
us? You can see us. but we
No, I
can't see
turned
you.
it off. You can't
Okay,
see us.
okay, so we're
Yeah.
on the same boat, okay.
We're gonna
I
practice
can
that one later.
hear you just fine now. I'm sorry the video didn't work.
Okay,
So we've looked at this proposal from Ellers and from you, Bruce, previously. But what we wanted to do was have an opportunity for the commissioners to ask questions about you and about this process. And the first proposal that you gave me had actually had a smaller number associated with it. And I said, no, I really would like for us to have a process that takes us from the point that we get our 5th commissioner on board after the June 6th election to having a report done in time to impact our preliminary levy decision in September. And I also asked that we included some additional public comment and public process in the proposal. So that's what we're looking at is a proposal for a capital improvement financial planning services. And if maybe you could give a few minute description of what that looks like from your end and what we would expect on our end.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, everyone, for having me. So what we call financial management planning is really capital improvement planning taken to the next level. And it can incorporate both capital and operating budget decisions or potential priorities that you want to model as part of a multi-year projection. The traditional capital plan, capital improvement plan, capital investment plan, there's lots of different names for it, typically includes a description of the project, a estimated dollar amount, cost for the project, the year in which you think it might occur, and then sometimes we'll make an assumption or an estimate as to whether you'll be using cash or debt to finance. But it doesn't place then that program in a larger context of the overall county budget and tax impacts. And that's what we try to do, and I think we do very well with our financial management plan. So with the financial management plan, you really have 3 elements. You have that fully fleshed out capital improvement plan with a set of assumptions as to the projects and the prioritization of those projects, the likely cost, when you're going to do it and how you're going to pay for it. But then it really, if you assume, for instance, that you'll be using bond financing to fund any elements of that CIP, it then translates those inputs into projections for your road and bridge fund or your general fund or your human services fund, probably mostly your your road and bridge and your general fund, so that you can really see the multi-year impact of those decisions. Similarly, if you make an assumption that you're going to pay for a certain project or a certain set of projects more with cash reserves, we can show what that impact on your overall reserve levels will be and show how your reserves as a % of your operating expenditures may change over time as well. And then the model really gives you the impact to see tax impacts. So if you have a number of big projects and let's say they're not all funded by your half-cent sales tax for transportation, you can really see, okay, in order to maintain our fund balances at a stabilized % of operating expenditures, we may need to either make efficiencies in other parts of the county budget or increase the property tax revenues. And we can model different ways of doing that in a way that seems reasonable and feasible for the board and for taxpayers and doesn't result in a big shock to anyone's property tax bill. So long story short, this is really, again, trying to take a CIP, which is an important, very important first step. And I know that Dave Betts has worked on a number of different lists of potential priorities for road and bridge projects in ways that you could utilize the half-cent sales tax money, but then again, puts them in a full county context so you really can have the confidence of moving forward with a plan, of really first describing a plan to citizens and taxpayers and explaining why these are county priorities and how they are expected to impact the county budget and reserve levels and bonded indebtedness over the next 3 to 5 years. But then also you can really demonstrate that, hey, we do have the capacity and the wherewithal to work this plan and to get these projects done and then to pay for whatever fiscal consequences those projects might have. So that's really what it's about. We have a number of details about the types of funds that we would be modeling in this workbook and some of the other deliverables. But why don't I stop there? I would just also note, because we really feel this is important, that the end result is, we think, very user-friendly Excel workbook. We've taken strides to include as much detail as we think is necessary, and we can customize it to really your needs so that we have a realistic and a comprehensive view of the county's finances, but we don't want to make it overly complicated and too many bells and whistles, because ultimately we want your team to be the ones that feel like it has value and feel like they can confidently update the plan every year as part of your budgeting process. So we would be involved with developing the plan, developing the model, customizing it to your specific needs and starting place here in 2017. But then the goal would really be to turn it over to your team there to maintain it and to change, provide actual operating results every year, and then update the CIP and other assumptions so that you have a rolling perspective on your ability to accomplish projects and to pay debt service or whatever the case might be. Are there any questions about the financial management plan at a global level?
Questions, anyone? No questions.
Okay. So we're ready to go on this. We've been talking about capital planning with Jeff and with Brady and also with Dave and others at the county now for over a year. And, so we've sort of known that this has been on your radar screen, and so it's been on our radar screen as well. And we would be ready to get going in the next week or two. I have colleagues for whom this is a big part of what they do, so I would still be your lead person and really the main point of contact to make sure that we're tracking with your needs and desires for the model and implementing those in the model. But I would have a colleague working with me to do a lot of the development and data entry and so forth. And that would most likely be Jessica Cook on my team, who's worked on quite a few of these, including for counties, and she did a really big model last year for the city of Two Harbors, which I think was very useful for that community. So the two of us would be working on this and really could get this done over the next 2 to 3 months. The timing works well to queue things up, even with public meetings and discussion, so that you have a game plan that you can start the execution of that game plan with your 2018 budget, as Jeff indicated, and that preliminary levy in September.
So Bruce, I'll just make a point of context and I'll ask a question, and I understand Commissioner Bershon has a question too. So we're at our committee of the whole, so if we've got enough information that we believe we can make a decision, we'll put this on the agenda for next week's board meeting to approve this proposal. And the first question I would kick off is related to financial management plan deliverables, where it talks about 2 meetings with the county board, and what would the first opportunity for the county board to interact with and influence the things to be considered in the scope of this project?
Well, we would really look to accommodate whatever timeline you're trying to meet. I mean, I think we could certainly do our data collection over the next couple of weeks, and most likely have a draft. I would think we could have a draft model pulled together by early July. at the latest, maybe even toward the end of June, but certainly by the first part of July, so that we could really get feedback there, and then come to you again with a refinement either in late July and or early August, and then as you guys see fit, interweave public input with those discussions as well. I think we would need to work very closely with your office as well as with Dave and Brady and their teams. I know you've been looking at a number of courthouse improvements as well as highway facilities and then road and bridge projects. So, we're not sure if we have the full up-to-date list, but I know you have a lot of those data points already pulled together. So we should be able to get off to a pretty fast start.
Great. So Commissioner Wertheim and then.
Yes, Bruce, I've asked this question before, and I may sound naive, but the question is, in review of the county's current financial position, would you be making some recommendations in regard to the challenge that we have of having expenditures right now greater than, than what we're budgeting as far as previous budgets? We have this sort of a deficit that we're dealing with unless we cut services. Is there anything creative that you could recommend in that regard, or is it just, go for a 20% levy?
Well, I think I'm glad you raised that question because that gets really into the operating side of the model. And again, we will have projections for your major funds, including the funds that have most of your personnel costs in them. And I imagine, I haven't looked at the specifics, but I imagine a lot of your costs are tied up in personnel, salary and benefits. And I think while this project won't really look specifically at any of those organizational issues, it will, we will need your input, your team's input on assumptions that we should use for various cost drivers, such as health insurance and other operating costs. And we hope that this model will help to at least illuminate what the trend lines have been and what the consequences of those trends will be unless they're moderated through some form of policy action. So this model is fairly agnostic in and of itself. We will be able to run scenarios that say, okay, given this set of trend lines and inflation assumptions in your operating budgets, and given the set of capital projects that you're looking to tackle, here's how much cash you might reasonably use from reserves. Here's how much bonding you might reasonably do to support some of these capital projects. And then here's how much your property tax levy might increase over time to shoulder both those capital costs as well as the operating expenses that you're expecting. You have very strong fund balances currently, and we certainly think that's appropriate for a county in your situation, especially a county that does rely pretty heavily on federal pilots. And it certainly benefits you in your county rating process too, as your team just heard, and reiterated with S&P last week. Certainly, your reserve levels do help you with your credit rating, which therefore decreases your borrowing costs somewhat. But that's a policy decision still to make. And when you see all of these priorities in one model, and these projections for operating costs and all the things that you're wanting to do on the capital side, and if they are high priorities, you will be in a position to have a good discussion about fund balances and tax levies and how you want to move those gradually over time to still obviously work for the county, but also to get these things done. So that was a long-winded answer, but basically the model really should help to illustrate how these inputs and policy decisions are all interrelated and what the bottom line impact is. And that's really, what we focus on is what's your levy as a result of these assumptions? What's the property tax impact? How is that changing over time? And And then, you as the policymakers get to decide, is that a palatable and feasible game plan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, do you
I
remember your
have no
question? Okay. That was great, thanks. Other questions?
Sure.
Because I have a, could you tell me in September when we really need to have a good grip on all of this? Did you have a date here? First part of September, what are we looking at for the goal?
This is a question for Jeff. Just so you
Yeah,
know.
so Brady just updated the dates and the deadlines and the calendar for the 2018 budget development. And the deadline to submit proposed levies and choose TNT dates is September 30th.
Okay.
So our last regularly scheduled meeting in September would be
That should be the 26th.
the 26th.
Okay, thank you. So Bruce, you know what our schedule is now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't want to pressure you, but,
No, that's quite all right. One other thing I should just mention, so you can, I talked about tax impact, but I did want to note that the model also gives the opportunity to change on a year-by-year basis the assumptions that we use for both new property tax base that comes online as well as inflation in existing property tax values. We know that most of the change in Cook County's tax base is on existing property and facilities, buildings. But you do have some new development, and we want to have some indication that is readily visible as to what you expect to see with your property tax base, so that when we run those tax impact numbers, it's not overestimating what the impact is going to be on existing residents and taxpayers, but also doesn't underestimate it, because we don't want to set you up with a set of projections that are just wildly optimistic. And that's another thing. This model, since it is basically a glorified Excel workbook, one that we're very proud of, but it is a workbook, can be saved as any number of times to run different scenarios, both with different sets of capital projects, as well as different assumptions for operating costs and even tax-based growth, so that you can see, okay, do we want to, what's our base case, and then what's maybe a more aggressive case on a number of fronts, and what's a more conservative case, and that will help you hopefully, find your own comfort level and the scenario or the range of assumptions, the set of assumptions that you feel are most appropriate for this multi-year budgeting purpose.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Any other
It's
questions?
actually pretty cool. I mean, I know I'm a geek and I enjoy this kind of stuff, but it can really help. When you look at a list of millions and millions of dollars of capital projects, and you're a relatively small county, it can really seem insurmountable. But you have a really good starting place. You've got this half-cent sales tax. You've got strong fund balances. You've got really good financial management and a great track record that's reflected in your credit rating. And so you're not undertaking this exercise out of desperation or out of panic, like, my goodness, how are we going to balance the books? It's more like, how are we going to take our planning and our financial management to the next level? And that's a really fun situation to be in.
Great, thank you. So more questions or comments? Must be that time in the afternoon, 2:30, no blood sugar
Yeah.
left in the room.
It's pretty muggy down here, so I don't know
It's cold and rainy.
some of that. Well, we'll send some of this hot air up to your
Yeah, send
way.
some hot air up here.
I'm not ready. My blood is too thick from the winter still. It's a little hot for my taste.
Yeah, and send some sugar with that.
There you go. Well, thanks for the opportunity, everyone. And Thanks also to Jeff for keeping this conversation going. And if you approve this, I think you'll be pleased with the result, and I think we'll have some good discussions with both the board and with the public as part of this planning process.
Sounds great. So it sounds like the timing would work, and the timing for us to make the decision will work, so we know what we need to do. Great. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Too.
Be cool.
Bye-bye.
Keep cool. We'll get out. You get cool. Okay. Bing. Yeah. That's amazing. He'd be able to create a tool that we can just keep changing the variables to, for planning purposes, that will give us the information we need to make the right decisions.
We can use that tool for our budget process, so we can just randomly.
Well, why don't we have a tool like that? We could use it for every process we can do, but that, I mean, that is kind of the beginning of making a tool for budgeting that could give us outcome numbers, you know, it's just.
So this excuse me, but this Excel worksheet is gonna be a software piece that we can manipulate?
It's just a spreadsheet that you can
It's-
manipulate.
It's an enhanced spreadsheet where you can just change your assumptions and you can really manage it. You keep one over here as the final report, and then, like you said, you hit save as, and you go, okay.
We're on a different scenario.
Dave was doing this when he was estimating transportation sales tax revenues. You know, you do baseline and you do, let's figure 3% growth a year when we know that the number is closer to 6% growth a year. So he estimated what our capacity would be to take on debt related to transportation projects at 3%, at 6%. And let's say things keep growing and we look at 9%, right? And he gives you three different types of numbers. This is a model where you can change some of those assumptions. Like you said, you can change some assumptions about the projects we put in there. You can change the other source and use assumptions. And you can really just, you can ask what if. And we can take and look at it and say, okay, what if that? Well, here's what that looks like. What if this? Then here's what that looks like. You know, what if we do the minimum related to law enforcement center, but we do a big highway facility? Or we do the minimum of the highway facility and the law enforcement center? And you change all those assumptions and you take a look at them. You know, the power of planning is remember the illustration from December is, on average, over 25 years, our levy increase has been 4.3%, but we've had highs and lows. And if we'd levied 4.3% increase every year for those 25 years, we'd be at the same levy we are now, because that's how averages work. But we would have collected $26 million more. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. The highway building would have been built, and it would have been built out of savings. And we'd be halfway to a law enforcement center. So the point of the illustration is simply that if we plan now and set a strategy for the next 25 years, we can really maximize what we do. And the last example that I did was in Monoman with a budget of $2.5 million. We had a $16 million capital project, and we got a special allocation of local government aid of $250,000. And I told WSN, our city engineers, I said, I've got $250,000. I've got a $16 million project list. And over the course of 10 years, I can tell you that you've got an extra $50,000 in levy here and an extra $50,000 in levy here that you can put into place to add to that list. And they're wrapping up the first $12 million of their projects in the 3 years since I put that plan together, simply because they had a plan in place. Now, they had other funding too, but we have other funding as well. I mean, we got CASA funding, we got transportation funding, we've got retired debt service, we've got operational efficiencies from the law enforcement center, and we have levy. But levy is the smallest portion that he's showing in our model and our ability to manage our capital assets.
And I know that this sounds, this is, high finance is a complicated issue, but the spreadsheet helps you see the results and change the variables. And it, I can just hear what people might say out there that, spin doctor kinds of stuff. But this is the result of real math, real planning, real numbers. It's really, really, really good work. It's the work that we have to do. It's the work that we should all be doing. And I would say that it's probably not the work that's been done in Cook County so much in the past, outside of, you know, just being really mindful. Although I don't know that, it probably has been done for many, 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 many projects. I mean, before you embark.
Individually, but not-
Individually, but not project like we're
Look
talking
at
now.
Dave's equipment plan,
Mhm.
that was done
Yeah.
how many years ago?
Yeah,
Because
5
we
years.
didn't want this up and down and let's wait until
Yeah.
it breaks and drop half an hour.
So that would be another asset that we have. We have pieces that we've done before that can add to the whole puzzle and make it really work for the future. So, and we have, you know, smart people at the table. So this is the time to really look at this stuff and to add another smart team to our repertoire. Just makes sense at this point in time. It's pretty exciting. And I think we'll talk about that more, but it's like we have to do this, we have to look at this stuff. That's what we're charged with. We can't just keep, you know, patching and looking for dimes and
Not even
nickels while the
patching.
$5,000 bills go whipping by our ears. So I'm excited. I think this is
And
good
I
work.
think that people forget how much we're building in our tax capacity with construction and what's going on. For that little 8% of land that we have available for people to build on, you can't get a contractor right now.
Right.
The EDA has
Right.
been trying for 2 months to get an estimate on putting in walls to separate offices, and they can't get anybody to do it.
So that we won't even, this won't even have anything to do with that.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
you know, people keep saying, I'm not getting any richer, I'm on fixed income, you can't keep raising our taxes. Well, our tax base is growing. The amount of new properties and improved properties is growing, and that's part of what Bruce is talking about, Kimmel.
And that we have a good bond rating, we have 0.5% transportation tax, and that we have good fund balances, and that we have retiring debt. Those are great assets, so we should move on.
So are we in agreement do we want to put that on the agenda for next Tuesday?
Sure.
Have that
Yes.
conversation then, but.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Then review budget timeline and opportunities for public comment. Brady, do you want to review the calendar which should look very similar to the calendars you've been getting for Brady for
It's
years?
very similar. So typically, we start early in June, first meeting, and that's where if there are any directives from the board, that would be the ideal, to have that at that time, because then we send those out to the departments, so they have some idea where we're ending up. Then asking them to get the information back to us by sometime mid-July to the end of July, and then we'll assemble those requests, and then they'd be ready for the county board to discuss them or to hold hearings with any departments or any entities that they wish. And then we have time for follow-up meetings. We'll get our town special taxing district levies on September 15th. We have to finish up ours by the 26th for a regular meeting, certainly by the 30th, and then we have to have them all in here by the 30th, including school, city, etc. Then it's on to the truth in taxation. Send out those statements between November 11th and 23rd. We will have scheduled our public meeting on September 26th. That's a requirement. So we'll have our meeting between November 25th and December 29th. Typically earlier is better. And then set our final levy. So that's the basic outline. The big question is whether we're going to have a directive, a levy not to exceed, for example, rather than waiting for the departments. Are we going to have, if we get some numbers back from Bruce that can help us, and we look at what we've done in the past years, what we were looking at last year for levy, what we think we need for 2018, if we can come out with some kind of a directive to guide the departments rather than wait for them. I think that's the goal.
Yeah, so reviewing the timeline, budget goals and the conversation there is we've got our next budget committee meeting scheduled for Monday the 22nd. And I think a really good way to look at the work that we have ahead of us is we have a conversation, the board sets a goal or sets a context with the capital improvement plan, the financial management plan. We set a preliminary levy, but we want to set the preliminary levy at something that that we're ready to set a final levy at, so that we have some integrity in the process, that we know what we're doing. From September to December, the levy should change because we refined some of the assumptions that we made. That hopefully Brady shows earnings from investments is a little bit higher than we thought. Or we get a narrowing down of, hey, we finalized some of our negotiations with some of our employment staff and we got better numbers here. We can make our assumptions more concise. So we can modify from something 0.9 to something 0.4 because we have better information from September to December. But we really, we have a problem in the community right now. In September, you said, if we didn't approve a levy of 19.9%, we're gonna have to eliminate staff. And you passed a levy of 11%, and we didn't eliminate any staff. So here's the public perception problem we have. Jim, I've heard that from several of your members. The first thing we have is we have that 7% that we cut is kicked forward into a bill that we have to pay in 2018. And we've had conversations about what that looks like. But we can't possibly, as staff, put together a budget that isn't supported by the board and saying, this is what we're willing to support for a budget. Another point of the context of the conversation that we have is the public comment is anything greater than a 3 or 4% increase is unreasonable and unrealistic. And I agree. And our expenditures over the last 7 years have gone up on an average of 1.44%. And our levy over the last 7 years has gone up an average of 4.3%. So on average, we're right there. We're still in that model of if we eliminate the highs and lows and we find a line that makes sense and we target a strategy going forward, we can build a whole lot of predictability and integrity into the system and let people know what they're getting and what they can plan for. So I'll share these with people if they want to see them. But I took the 25-year history and checked it down to 2010 to current. And it's really not that important. The important part is that I hope that over the month of May and June that we narrow down and that we can provide the context for if you want to set a preliminary levy not to exceed 10%, here's what's in and here's what's out. If you want to set a preliminary levy not to exceed this amount or that amount, here's what's in and here's what's out. I want to do the same thing that we did last year, but I really want to put it back on the commissioners to give us the direction of what we're going to do and how we're going to do that. And then negotiate with the staff and find out what does that mean? What impact does that have? Any questions about? And so we've got June 13th here as the initial dates for board discussing budget goals. Well, we're already discussing budget goals. And the other thing that we'll have to have as a conversation is what are we going to do with non-mandated and discretionary entities? Are we going to have a similar process this year because they're coming up to budget time and they're going to ask questions like that? We'll ask that question in our budget meeting so we can actually just sit down and think through it, find a place to start on that. But I just, what do you want us to do? Because we didn't we haven't balanced the budget.
That's my concern, and somehow or the other, we really got to spend some time on that, and because that's our dilemma. I mean, you just said it, but how do we correct an issue of deficit? it wasn't deliberate, you know, it was just, let's get this done, without looking at the implications. And so, that to me is the crux of the problem that we're facing this next year, is how in the world are we gonna deal with that? And is there some way to get creative? I don't know. Or do we just have to say, we cut staff? I mean, you know, anything less than so much is gonna be staff, right?
Well, 9 million of the $19 million expenditure budget is staff and benefits. And most of the other money that we have that comes through is pass-through money that we don't even,
Right.
you know, that we don't, road and bridge money that comes in, we can't use it, we can't divert it for some other purpose. And the stuff that comes in through Health and Human Services and goes back out through Health and Human Services is pass-through money. So we have very little to do with some of that $10 million that's not in staff and benefits. So it's,
So I guess what I ask is that, you know, whenever we talk about a levy thing, and of course this is obvious, we have to talk about the implications of it. And not just say we're gonna go 9 or 10%, say, well, what is that gonna mean? And we'll have to play that out in various scenarios, unless we just say, well, we gotta bite the bullet and balance the budget with our current staffing model. Then how can we get creative, maybe with the help of some financial planning to deal with that? But I just don't think we can get to the end and, you know, and say, well, this is what we're gonna do, and then we don't deal with the consequences. So I'm gonna be very strong in that. I would just like to say that right now. We really have to be careful about that.
I hope the conversation.
So, like getting set in June or something like that.
Yeah, I hope the conversation resolves around the level of service, the level of programs, what we want to provide in this community. Josh and I have conversations all the time about, you know, what do you do with the people, it's horrible, what do you do with the people who can't take care of themselves? You know, what is society's responsibility to them? And the major policy that we have as an organization is our budget. It's the major policy that we impact, and that policy says everything about who we are. It says everything about who we are as an employer, who we are as a leader in the community, and it's okay. We really need to define the scope. Rena and Dave are both very good at defining the scope of what is it that we can do with the resources that have been made available to us in each of our respective areas. And as a large organization, we haven't really had that conversation. We've had that conversation at a department level, but we haven't had it at an organization level. What is our responsibility to the community? And that's the conversation that we should have, because making numbers based on dollars doesn't necessarily
Just on
cut it,
numbers,
although numbers are a tool to help us express that expression of policy.
It's the implication. I agree. It's well stated.
Commissioner Kirk.
So Brady, on June 13th, will you bring us the discretionary, what 17 was?
Yes.
So we can look at it and I mean, that's one area that we can make a decision now and say, are we gonna leave it the same so that when the applicants come in, they know what they're fighting against? Or we can say, we wanna drop it. We've been dropping it over the last few years. And we can just kind of make a decision to look at it then, the new commissioner will be in. But it's hard to just say, well, last year was 176,000, so this year we wanna have 160, I wanna actually see who that affects.
We'll have that conversation at the budget committee. I'll tell you, that was very interesting at Bobby's town hall meeting on Saturday. There were people in the room who were saying, I hope that you'll consider the importance of those county dollars going to support those, and everybody hates the word discretionary.
Non-mandated.
Expenses, because people understand that if somebody doesn't contribute to the things that impact the quality of life here, then it's gonna change the quality of life here.
And that affects the economy, and that affects the tax base. You know, that's what sort of spirals down.
The single biggest argument for the county being involved in economic development is we're reliant on people who own property doing well and doing the right things that protect their investment in this county. Because then we have to go back to them the next year and say, thank you, and we need to keep doing that. So if we're not helping the economy grow in every way that we can, we're missing a significant portion of the responsibility.
I agree.
I just don't
You
wanna
can-
go through another year where we ask the departments to tell us what they need, and then they sit in their offices and cross their fingers and hope to God that the board is gonna pass the levy. I would just rather, if this board as a whole doesn't wanna support the service that we provide, I want everybody to know that in June.
Well, I don't know that we could know it in June, because we are really planning on engaging Ellers to help us affect that decision, but we need
But if the
to.
majority of the board does not wanna go higher than 5%, then we know in June what we have to do to get that down. As sad as it is.
I'll answer a crazy question. This is another function of math, is if the cost of living goes up 3%, we can't match it with a 3% increase in levy, because our level of self-support, our taxes are low. Our self-support of our budget is only about 1/3 of our budget. The rest of it comes from other sources. So when Commissioner Moe asked me last year, and he was honestly exacerbated, he didn't know why. He said, why do we keep having the highest increase in the state? And I had to say, because we have a small budget and we have the lowest level of self-support. So if something changes, right, I mean, a $200,000
Yeah,
increase
wow.
in the budget for
Yeah.
out-of-home placement doesn't impact a big county. Even a 5% increase in out-of-home placement doesn't affect a big county, because they have the ability to manage it or to adjust for it. They may even have financing that they can refinance things. They can find different ways to do that. We're in a good position because we're retiring debt, but we're in a bad position because we don't have any ability to finance creatively.
The 70% that isn't levied doesn't go up at 3% a year.
Yep.
No.
Right.
So if our costs go up
So if it
3%,
stays the same,
Or
it may
gets
go
less.
down, it may go up a
Right.
little.
if costs go up 3% and that 70% goes down to 65%, then we gotta go higher. So a realistic number, 4.3 isn't a realistic number. Honestly, if you're talking about 3% inflation, 5.5 or 6% is a realistic number, unless the game at the state and federal agency change, and that's just math. If we wanna maintain the same level of service.
And that's the key. And that's the key.
So one of the things we've been talking about at the MAP meeting is having a conversation and a dialogue. I mean, there's almost nothing in Rena's budget that's mandated. There's almost nothing in my budget that's mandated, but there's things that we have to do so that we can provide the mandated services. That's what central services are about. There's things in Josh's budget that are mandated, but there are things that are not mandated that we do because it's less expensive to spend money on that than it is on the mandated services. That'll be 2 or 3 years down the road if we don't spend money on prevention. And we've all had those conversations, but Commissioner Bershheim, this is gonna be your first budget year sitting on the board going through this with us, so you're gonna have a lot of questions. And we're gonna have a new commissioner who's in the same position without even the benefit of having gone through last year's experience necessarily. So part of the process, I'll ask, is 2 years ago, we held, Brady mentioned it, we held sessions with all the department heads and reviewed all their budgets. I'm assuming we're gonna wanna do more of that this year than we did last year, because we have 2 new people there. And we're gonna wanna ask a lot of those questions, and we're gonna wanna get started earlier. I would imagine we'd also probably wanna do some of that in the committee beforehand, so we can vet that and have a blend of what we did in 15 and 16, I think, would be helpful.
Yeah, just from my perspective, for me to at least understand it from my past experience, whenever we talk about scenarios, we gotta talk about what does it mean and what are the implications for it in our staffing or how we operate. So we're always thinking those terms. You know, if it's whatever it is, we're talking in terms of services and people. And then cost is really secondary to some extent. So
Should be.
cost doesn't drive everything, we gotta look at balancing cost and service.
Brady, are we allowed to throw fundraisers? Seriously,
We're
if
allowed
people
to
that
accept-
tell me,
we're
Heidi,
allowed
I
to
would
accept
raise my.
donations.
I mean, I have people that call me and say, I would be willing to pay more taxes if you supported this. I'd be willing to pay more taxes for this. Or I'm okay with the levy increasing. It's a serious question, I'm not joking.
It's a serious question, but ask the school how many people actually.
Oh, we know how that works.
Made a contribution in 2015 when
When
the bond levy didn't pass.
There are people asking if they can buy calcium chloride.
Not yet, but I can tell you
Well, no,
that
they're-
Dave
they're
has
already
done some
asking.
road work, yeah, I haven't
Oh,
gotten
no, they're
one yet.
asking for this year, if they can buy it, if they can, create a neighborhood and purchase it, because they're already
Feeling it.
and sad that it's not there in the
I'm
budget.
thinking Pete's business is gonna go up at the car wash this summer. He
Or we
might
could
not
sell
want
it
us-
at Bucks.
It's not something that's easy to mobilize.
Yeah.
We could have
Well,
a
we don't
calcium
mobilize it
chloride
because we're doing
fundraiser.
So we
significant.
can't do a
Right.
spot mobilization of calcium chloride.
You know,
Okay, I
it's-
just have a procedural question. I can see that there's some people out there that would like to speak, but in the past, we haven't allowed it, and except at public comment. And I'm just asking the question, probably in this group, the committee of the whole, we need to treat it just as we would.
When we've done work sessions, we have not, because it gives the perception that, and we do it at public comment, so everybody has equal opportunity.
Right, it's
for
about that
public
fairness
comment.
piece,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, so that's why we didn't do it. I mean, we
Yeah.
kinda did it when we were doing budget discussions for a while, and then we stopped doing it because there was concern that people that could be here at one could have a discussion and other people.
right,
could
and we
not.
haven't
Yeah.
done that, we haven't created a public comment. So I would just say, because I know you have really important things to interject, if you can like hold that thought, write it down, interject it next week at public comment, or just send us a letter so that we all get it. Because it's not that we don't want the information.
Dave
Okay.
does have a solution for calcium chloride, sort of.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it, like, they do districts and they do buy. I mean, it's too late probably for us to start a program at this point. But the other thing I wanted to point out too is that, because we've talked about what if the board decided to come back and say, we're gonna give some money for calcium chloride. We're almost too late now at this point, so, everybody's got their contracts and by the time we could probably get somebody to be August, and at that point, it's almost wasted at that point.
So they need to install air conditioning and keep their doors in
Yes.
condition.
Well, but could you give us a plan for that, so if we don't add it to the 18 budget, we are prepared to figure out that if people feel that's a need, that we could implement a program that's not on our levy? I mean,
Yeah.
or is? I mean-
Yeah, I can work on it. It's something I can work on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because I know that when we talked about cutting it, you said there are other ways to do it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if we don't make a commitment to a certain volume, it's not gonna be cost
Doesn't
effective
have
for
an
somebody to
effect.
come up here and then do, again, my experience in Monoman County is the county had a contract for X number of miles of roads. And when that group was mobilized, then if you weren't specifically on that group, then you could make an appeal at some point ahead of time to buy additional space. Well, you can't afford to buy that if you don't have the mobilization of the first $100,000 worth of coming up here.
And that's what we need to know when we're making our decisions of whether or not that gets put back in, because it's 140,000.
And
2%.
I gotta say, I didn't understand the value of that before. And so my hope would be, as a commissioner, to understand more the value of all the services, so that I know it's possible to cut or not cut them, from a real value and how it affects the value of everything else, and how it affects the economy, how it affects new people coming into the area, how it affects just the value in the way of life. So I'm hoping that we have a better understanding of that in the next couple of months, so that we can not set arbitrary numbers, because the arbitrary number makes no sense. We need to set numbers based on the value.
One of the things I'd just interject really quick, and it seems everybody's got these issues, but from our standpoint, because our budget is so much purchasing, so we're very, very dependent on the fluctuations of the market. gravel, I think I've told this story before, but I'm gonna repeat it again. When I first got here, I think we paid $3.85 a yard to crush gravel. This year, we're paying almost $9 a yard. That's in 7 years.
In
We're
7
paying
years.
almost we're paying $1, a little over $1 more a yard this year. So our gravel, the board, when I got here, we were doing 90, 100, something like that. The board got us up to 150. That first year, 150,000 that we were crushing gravel, I think we crushed like 27,000 yards. This year, we're down to, I guess we have to adjust 17,000 yards this year. So, I mean, that's pretty significant change in just
Just the cost of
3
maintaining
years,
what
2
we have.
years, I think, since we've been up at 150.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a service question, and just, instead
Yeah.
of just saying, to do our services the way we want for our residents, we
Right.
need 30,000 yards of crushed gravel, he's coming to us and hoping that he gets enough money to get just that little bit to fill those
To
holes in.
maintain.
Yeah, we don't crush for a yardage, we crush yardage to $1 that the board gives us. And that really is where we're at. And we've talked with the board, and I don't know, Heidi, if you were on when we first started talking that, you lose about an inch of gravel a year. And, a typical surfacing, what should be, which we don't have in the county, is 4 inches.
How much are we gonna lose without calcium?
Well, that's about an inch without calcium. We gain an extra, so about every 4 years you should be graveling. We gain a year or two maybe 2, if
Like
we're
20%.
lucky, if we calcium chloride, so.
Yeah, so all of that, I mean, just to
All that
understand
goes-
all of that is, goes into budgeting and how we do it. And then if we add, these capital conversations and construction costs, and if, like, your conversation, Dave, about having, if you were to have built a new highway facility 3 years ago, it would have been way cheaper
Yeah, 30%.
than it is today. And today will be way cheaper than it will be tomorrow. So that's why it's so important to have these conversations and plan for that. It's pretty hard to plan for costs, but we can only look back. But in looking back, we can see.
Plan to fair warn, I know, because we originally talked June possibly, but given a lot of things that have happened to the state with the bills and just being behind in general on the state level, they're telling us most of our numbers that they give us won't come out until mid-July at best. So, as the office said, so we may be able to give you, a $200,000 or $300,000 ballpark, but we're not going to be able to get
Perfect.
much closer than that until probably late July. So, a lot of those reimbursements that make a big difference.
And we'll do the
Just
best
want to do
job that
things.
we can with as much information as we can get, and it will feel good.
Excruciating.
It'll feel excruciating, yeah, yeah. But it just feels like we're up for the challenge. We're up for the challenge.
Need to be.
Yeah, so we need to go home and eat our Wheaties. I heard we shouldn't eat Wheaties, we should eat fruit instead.
Spinach. You watch
Yeah,
Popeye?
that's right.
For breakfast.
Yeah, spinach for breakfast.
Especially out of a can, boy, that's
Oh, yeah, sounds good.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Refrigerate it, Rena, it's better that way.
Anything else that,
Motion to adjourn.
hey? Second, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.